fell in love with photography.
Grab your heart, twist it, and take it back out.
Friggin' blew my mind.
Hello and welcome back. I know the coffee here is very attractive, but we are starting with our next panel. So we would very warmly and kindly ask you to be quiet. Attention, please be quiet and join us in the audience for the next panel. It would be very kind of you to join us in the audience, and please be quiet as we start with our next panel. Thank you so much. That's very kind. I'm super excited for the next panel, Facing Repression, hosted by wonderful Leni, who came here as part of a partnership with IFA to show a film of Carl and to host 2 talks. Yesterday night we already started, and I'm very excited to see where you bring us today with amazing ideas. Thanks so much to all the other panelists, Ramona, Milan, and Ibrahim. It's a pleasure of having you here today. Thank you so much.
And Carl. Well, welcome everyone to this panel. So we have limited time, so I'm very excited about the conversation. So I'll go straight to the point and hear about our filmmakers and journalists on what their experience are in facing repression. And I think I'd start off with Carl, whose film, Dangerous or Delicado in Filipino, is being screened tomorrow. So Carl, what were the dangers you faced in making Delicado?
Thanks, Leni. To briefly introduce Delicado, it's a film about land defenders on Palawan, this beautiful tropical island paradise. It's home to the last great rainforests, and the land defenders essentially getting themselves killed trying to stop the deforestation there. There's sort of a crazy brave lawyer who uses the citizens arrest law to send people barefoot and unarmed into the forest to do citizens arrests on illegal loggers to take their chainsaws. They get themselves killed doing that, and down there as well, there's environmental campaigner turned politician who got put on Duterte's, the then President Rodrigo Duterte's drug list because she was trying to take on the powerful interests. So it's a very dangerous place for anyone who's trying to stand up against the culture of impunity there. I was a journalist based in the Philippines for quite a number of years, working for Agence France Presse. I was going to do a story on ecotourism in Palawan, and one of the environmental campaigners was shot in the head and killed before I was about to go down. So I went to investigate his murder. So that turned into about 5 years of work on the film in Palawan. We went into the forest with the land defenders. They're unarmed, going in taking on the armed illegal loggers. It's Nieves Rosento, the politician. She was on the campaign trail once she was named by Duterte as a narco politician. 4 other mayors had been executed after having that label put on them. So she was, awaiting that. So all to say, I think the land defenders face these dangers every single day with their lives, and they continue with their fight, and it's incredibly inspiring. Myself, I was based in Manila. I was going down there. I generally say that there were certain dangers for us, but nothing like the dangers that these land defenders face every day. And our biggest fear was essentially anything that we may do may put them in any further danger. And so that was our biggest concern, and it still remains that today.
But I know that you were inspired by the killing of one journalist to make this film, but knowing that, weren't you you were aware that there's killings going on, and how did you navigate that, given that you went there, shoot, and there's hostile environment against
Right.
those doing?
How do we navigate it? I guess I'm a journalist by background, and I've covered conflicts around the world. So we use that training. We kept the team extremely small on the ground. Essentially, there was one other cameraman, a good friend of mine, and also sort of a war correspondent, Tom Bannigan. And so the two of us were spending just a lot of time on the ground. We were, at various times bringing in Philippine journalists and/or producers, but also very mindful of the fact that we didn't want to put them in danger. So that was sort of, and again, look, the issue is, I'm a person, or a foreign person based in Manila. It is safe for me to go down. Essentially, I don't want to overcook that. Going into the forest, you hike in, and it's actually an adventure with the guys, and there's a bit of danger there, but it was very manageable.
But similar to Carl, Ibrahim faces a danger, but I think yours is a different context. So can you tell us about your experience?
Thank you so much for having me. Just for those who doesn't know, the film is called Hollywood Gate, and it's about the first year of the Taliban in power. So I follow one high-ranking commander, which is the head of the Air Forces, and a ground soldier inside Kabul Air Base, basically inside the previous CIA or so-called CIA base, because the US did not approve this yet. And we follow them as they find the American weapons left behind, try to fix these weapons and their plans, or what they plan to do with these weapons. And the movie is going to be the closing film, so it's going to be playing tomorrow night at 8 p.m. I hope I'm right. I think the situation is a bit different, because also I come from a background in journalism, and being in hostile environment where the killing is happening in the moment is different than when after war, which was my situation. I arrived in Kabul, and Taliban were just newly have just arrived to, or have just taken over the power, and they were quite euphoric about being in power. So they were seeking the validation through journalism, which was not your case. Your case was definitely much harder. So being there at that time earlier, you start to find ways of staying and try to convince them that I could be the journalist or the filmmaker. I arrived with a journalist ID, but then I directly said I'm a filmmaker and I would love to stay here for 1 year. And my hassle has become more of trying to keep the access, because they didn't want me in. After a very short period, they started to show their true colors. They said in the beginning, we're going to let women be free and do all of these beautiful fake or beautiful lies that they have told one after another. And by the time they stopped saying these lies and they started to show their true colors, and it has become much harder for me to maintain the access. But really, I don't want to dwell into what I went through psychologically, because that's not very important when you really compare it to the people of Afghanistan and what they are facing on a daily basis. I had the free will to go to Afghanistan. I had my camera, and I went there. I could leave and go home, but the people there did not have the choice to have the Taliban rule them the way they are ruling them, or they did not have the choice to have the US invade their country the way it has invaded them for 20 years and left the country in the hands of the Taliban. And also they did not have the choice to have the Soviet Union or the Brits invade their country. So it's a nation that is torn by a lot of wars. And if you decide to go to such environment, you have to understand that whatever you go through as a filmmaker is really nothing compared to what the people are facing. But having said that, you cannot not do therapy, you cannot not take care of your health, and it's one of the things we're really trying to talk a lot about, is how important it is for filmmakers to consider therapy, and how it must become part of the budget of any of these dangerous films, that you should definitely consider therapy as part of the budget, and it should become even a requirement by the funds. If you're doing this, we can give this such therapy fund, and these therapy funds are available for journalists mainly, but it's not really available much for filmmakers. We got a fund for therapy through a journalist, through Rory Peak Fund, but this was not initially intended for filmmakers, and I really hope the industry will understand the importance of that, and I could already see a lot of filmmakers now that I've spoken to in the recent year, whenever I mention that, they directly go and talk to their producers and add the therapy to the budget, because it is very, very important to continue, or even to understand why you're taking such huge risks, because at the end, if we're not taking care of ourselves, we make a film and we destroy ourselves.
That's very good to know. Actually, I know some journalists in the Philippines who covered the drug war was still traumatized by what they saw. So that's very important, I think. But I'm curious to know, how long did it take for your subjects to shed their vulnerability in order for you to catch those moments?
Vulnerability with the Taliban. It's a very funny word. I don't think Taliban has shed vulnerability or trusted me. Trust is a huge word. I think it's more of accepting the fact that this guy is there, because we haven't seen him do anything that is annoying, or not annoying. I think I was annoying from the very first second of the last. But I mean, we haven't seen him do something that breaks the rules. When we tell him don't do that, he doesn't. So I was understanding the fact that I'm within a military space. So being in that military space requires that you have to respect the military requirements of you. When a leader says you don't do that, you don't try to do it. So I tried to stay silent as much as possible, keep holding my camera even if I'm not filming. So I become this weird guy with the camera, and for them I was the weirdo in the room. And there are a lot of weirdos there, so I just become one of the weirdos. And that's how things really worked out. And it's really important that I go back to the point of therapy, because after a while I would not be able to continue not talking, because they say something really horrible. They talk about like suppressing women or expressing their very extreme toxic masculinity, if you want to name it with our terms that we use, but I think it's a cute term if you add it to the Taliban in that situation. And then I would not be able to stay calm. I'm like, from inside you could see that there's fire coming out. So I directly have to leave the country, go and do therapy, and then come back again, being able and ready to do such a thing. And if I didn't do therapy, I don't think I was being able to maintain the access, because most of the access was based on the fact that you should not respond to anything that happens in front of you, nor take it personal. And I think your stories add way more to that.
No, but I was going to say, in Hollywood land, it's really interesting because they just show their truth, right? And they're also performative, and they all think that it's all good, right? And in that performance, you see the absurdity of it. So they gave you what you thought you wanted, and in that was some kind of kernel of truth that was chilling. So it wasn't even a matter of trust, right? They just gave you what they thought should be shown to the world. And what was shown to the world is chilling. And in that sense, it was like, yeah, you just could stand back, but it's hard not to respond, because it's like, you know, when you see the film, it's it's difficult. It's difficult not to, as a human being. So I see what you said, yeah.
Before I go to you, Ramona, because these three kind of work on hostile environments and dangerous ones, so Milan, can you tell me, how do you tell your story given your context?
Well, hello everyone, my name is Milan. I'm a journalist from Belgrade, Serbia. I work at a news website called nova.rs. And we work in an environment that is not as hostile as I have to be honest. Here, of course, as Afghanistan or the Philippines for that matter. But nevertheless, the dangers are grave for journalists covering certain topics. For example, I mean, my website, just for a couple of words of context, is very critical of the government in Belgrade. And we openly investigate and report on any cases of corruption and wrongdoing of the government for the past 12 years. And this is something they really don't like, to be very mild about it. But it's not like they don't like it, they don't read it. No, they put enormous pressure on all journalists specifically, personally, and the company and the newsroom itself throughout all this time. So for example, our website started working in 2020, just when the pandemic started, brilliant time to start a business. During the lockdown, the hospitals were of course overwhelmed, the number of sick people was rising and so on. And the situation in the hospitals was dire, even before the pandemic. So when the whole thing started, the whole system started to crumble. And the biggest problem, of course, in the first weeks and months was the incredible lack of ventilators used for the toughest patients. So our correspondent from Novi Sad, Ana Lalic, had information directly from the hospital through her contacts because she was covering healthcare for a very long time. She knows the doctors, she knows what it's like. She got information firsthand about the terrible conditions of work in the hospital. There were no ventilators. Although they did get money from the EU during previous years and so on, that never saw anything happen with, you know? So she published a story. It was a testimony of the people who worked in the hospital, telling under, you know, they didn't reveal their identities because they were afraid, of course, for repercussions. But the truth came out. So what happened, the night the news was published on our website, the police stormed her home in the middle of the night. They just barged in without a warrant or anything. They seized her phone. They extracted information from her computer. They took her to prison. And to my knowledge, she was the only journalist to have been in prison in Europe for covering COVID, ever. So, of course, we called our lawyers. The whole newsroom was up at like 3 a.m. and so on. There was a huge reaction, of course, of the whole media ecosystem in Serbia and so on. She was let go after, I think, 1 day. But the very fact that you can arrest a journalist for reporting about terrible conditions in a hospital during a health crisis is just one example of how far the government is ready to go. So what they did, actually, they got the name of her sources through her phone, through her laptop, which is of course against any law, and it cannot be used in any sort of judicial process or whatever, because you can't do it. It's breaking the law. You're the police or whatever, but you're doing it. So nothing ever came out of it in terms of, you know, legal consequences. But the consequences for Anna were terrible. And before this trip, because I knew what the subject of this talk would be, I talked to her and a couple of our other journalists who were going through similar situations to ask her just what it looks like. What was it like that night when the police barged in, and what it's like to wake up in the morning, you know, and what your day looks like when you go to work, when you go to pick up your kids from school and so on. And I have to say I was shocked, even though I know them well and I know the story and so on. The details were shocking to me because all of them basically told me pretty much the same stuff, which is you check your car, underneath your car every morning. You check your tires, whether they were messed around with. You watch over your back wherever you go. Another journalist who covered much more dangerous topics than the hospital story, because he covers organized crime in Serbia. And organized crime in Serbia has been proven to have very direct links to the highest levels of authority in the country. The president, his inner circle, members of his family, members of his party, of the government on all levels, with direct contacts with organized criminal groups that did some really horrible things, not just drug dealing and weapon smuggling, but also, you know, murders, mutilations. Horrible videos have emerged from their lairs and so on. So the journalist who covered this story, for example, told me, so I asked him, so you published this story. you say, okay, there's this direct link between the government and the organized crime group and so on. And what happens to you? Do you like normally go to the supermarket tomorrow? Do you, when you and your wife go to a dinner or a party or whatever, is it like, and he told me a story about, they had like a birthday party of his niece, for example, in a kafana. It's like a Serbian style taverna with like live music, and it's all loud, and Serbs are very loud and very out there and so on. So during the night, the husband of his cousin was the only one who was not drinking. He was the safe driver. And he noticed two people in the corner of the kafana, just sitting there. Two guys in black t-shirts, just sitting there and messing with their phones. So at one point he walked around and went to the bathroom, and he saw on the display of his phone the picture of my colleague. Just two creepy guys in the corner. It was clear that they were either secret police or people from the organized crime group, or which is most likely both.
Yeah.
So that's what it looks like. I mean, it's really, it gets scary.
Yeah.
For example, Anna has like a panic tester with her all the time. If something happens, she just presses it, and it should alert either the police or the private security company that was hired by our company to jump to her aid.
So I think Ramona has similar experience with what Milan was telling with your experience. It might not be the same as them, but it's a different phase of repression.
Yes. Look, I started my career in the Philippines with a film about Imelda Marcos, and she ended up suing us back when, 20 years ago, for invasion of privacy and sullying her good name. Imelda Marcos, she's like the wife of a dictator with 3,000 pairs of shoes. I couldn't possibly sully
That's
her
a good name.
right? But that's the start of my career. And ever since then, it's always been, power is, especially power with no guardrails, is irrational. You always think they're never gonna do it, but they will. So many years later, I was filming with Maria Ressa, who was, of course, the journalist and Nobel Peace Prize laureate. She hadn't won the Nobel yet, but President Duterte was in power. And President Duterte is a thug. I mean, he boasts about killing people, right? So when you're in a car with Maria Ressa filming her, and she dons a bulletproof vest, and you're in there with your cinematographer and your sound person, and you're looking around, I'm like, should we be in a bulletproof vest? Because we're in the line of fire here. So you have to reassess. And it's an everyday reassessment of how much risk you can take. And I think I have to be I always care about my crew, because my crew are local. I split my time between the US and the Philippines. I can leave, but they're there. So I'm always mindful of their tolerance for risk. And always I say, do you want to do this? It's okay if you can't, you can leave. But none of them did. But after realizing the bulletproof, and because of insurance purposes, my producers in the US were like, put on a bulletproof vest because insurance won't cover you. I'm like, what?
Is that the only reason?
Yeah, well, yes, they're producers in this case. That's the reason. And so we donned this bulletproof vest, and you know how hard it is to run after a person filming them with a bulletproof vest. It is heavy. So we tried it for like an hour, and we're like, this is impossible. And it's so hot in the Philippines, you can't. So we took it off. And so the producers are like, okay, you don't want a bulletproof vest, get security. I'm like, we'll have more security than Maria Ressa. That is impossible, because our goal is to blend to the background and not be noticed. The crew can't have more security. I'm like, that's not possible, right? So it's a reassessment. And we're not really afraid of Duterte, because I don't think Duterte would have gone after Maria, because her star was rising worldwide, right? It's the people around him who think they will do him a favor.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
It's those crazies, he had a cult following. It's the crazies, the random acts outside. So every motorcycle that would come near her car would be like, it was like intake of breath, and we would look at each other. And it got to be this, so it was a reassessing every night, It was therapy every night. Can we do this again tomorrow? should we do this again tomorrow? How are you feeling? It's a check-in every night. And then, of course, there's when I was shooting, and so it begins. I think that was 1,000 cuts. I know they're all melding. But the chief of staff of Duterte, I would be in touch with the chief of staff of Duterte because I wanted to film his rallies. And whenever I spoke to him, say, Mr. Panelo, can we blah, 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 he goes, how was Baguio yesterday? Baguio is a town up north. So just letting me know that they knew where we were, right? It's very subtle. And I'm like, Baguio was great, Mr. Panelo, you should really go and visit, right? But he was always like, oh, how was your meal at that restaurant? I mean, very subtle, but very obviously, very, it's obvious what he was doing. But I figured if I tell them what I'm doing, if I'm very visible, the less they can hit me. Yeah. It's when I'm hidden. So it's basically giving power the information they think they need about you, right? So power to them, of course, that's, information is power, right? So if they have the information about you, they feel like, we have tabs on them. We know where they're going. So at some point, I'm like, tell them where we are going. That keeps us safe.
Yes.
Because they feel like we're being very open. Of course, they didn't know everything we were doing, but
Give them a little something.
give them a little something so they leave you alone, or they think
They have the
that's-
power.
yeah, they have the power. Just give them the power that they need so you can do your work. But I worry about my crew a lot.
Because when you leave, it's the crew's.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the crew there. But and so it's reassessing every night their tolerance for risk, their tolerance for the danger, and then you do it again the next day. You can't really think about it. Like, I'm not a trained journalist. I'm a filmmaker, and maybe that's why I'm a little bit more naive about these things. And I think that naivete goes a long way because I'm like, sure, let's do it again the next day. But it really is, you can't think about it too much because you won't do anything, right? You'll stay home the next day. You just got to go. And they pray it's like, oh, these crazies don't come and hit you that day.
I'm sure, Carl, I don't know if you've experienced some intimidation or silent threatenings when you were filming Delicado, but I'm curious as well because when you go out of Palawan, your subjects remain there. So how do you ensure that your protagonists are also protected?
Yeah. I don't think you can ensure that the protagonists are protected. One of the many factors that you put into the decision-making process is trying to give the protagonists as much information as possible and letting them assess their own risks. They're in the best position to do that. In the Delicado context, it was, I was also, as a journalist for AFP, I wrote some stories about them that went out, and went, to, all around the world and gave them, I guess, a taste of what was, what this was about. Of course, we talk about it, but it's, for people in Palawan who don't know international media so much, how do you actually really give them sort of, a position to make informed consent? So working with AFP was helpful in that context. Part of it, though, is, as I said, we've got to let them make the decisions. Nieves Rosento, she told me 2 years, before Duterte named her that she knew that she was on Duterte's drug list. And it's like, okay, well, that's where and that's where I'd get out of there. And she goes, no, I'm not leaving. I'm staying and I'm going to continue to fight. And, I want you to tell my story. So that's, I think was, part of the decision, it was really her decision with, the land defenders who were going into the forests, barefoot, unarmed, they have lost their own friends and colleagues doing that, and they're making the decision to continue to go in to do this. They, want their story told. When I first went in, we filmed, them confiscating chainsaws, and talk about therapy. The whole group just sat down in the forest, and most of them were crying, and no one has told our story for the past 10 years, and we're desperate for people to know. So again, that doesn't mean I just go ahead blindly and tell that story from there, but that's part of the decision-making process. But it's their courage and bravery and determination was inspiring, and I was led by that.
Yeah, and we're actually part of the social impact campaign of Delicada, and it took us 2 years to bring it back to Palawan because of the security issues within the context of the Palawan, where environmental defenders are still being harassed. But I'm curious because at one of your subjects, the lawyer who initiated this is still persona non grata, so he cannot go back to Palawan. So how do you resolve the fact that your film is actually making more people aware, and that kind of also makes your protagonist more persona non grata as more people come to know? Is it something that you talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. We're having those conversations, and again, they wanted their story told. Bobby's persona non grata, but he was persona non grata well before our film came along. He was challenging the powerful interests. There's also a flip side to it. Part of the abuse that the powerful people can commit against our protagonists is because they essentially were voiceless. Duterte could name Nieves Rosento as a drug trafficker and say on national TV, I'm going to kill you. Partly because she had didn't have much of a profile. When the film came out, Nieves came up to Manila. We had our Philippine premiere at the Cinemalaya, the main film festival, and there were 1,500 people there. And Nieves, when I first saw her, she, Duterte's put me on the drug list. I don't know what to do. No one would speak to her. The local media wouldn't talk to her. Politicians were dropping her. And she, in front of 1,500 people, no one in the crowd knew that our protagonists were there. And when the film finished, she got up, and so did the others. And there was this huge standing ovation. And there were lots of powerful people in that room, one of whom was the British ambassador. Yeah. And she was the first person who got up to ask a question and to offer her public support. And then she invited Nieves and Bobby to her office on the Monday. And the ambassador took a photo with Nieves and posted it on Twitter with the Delicado poster. And, that's, part of a security blanket, an extra security for her. So, there are pros and cons to them being in the film.
Ibrahim, your protagonists are kind of different. So how do you are there consent for them to be featured in your film? How did you navigate that?
We call them antagonists, not protagonists.
Yeah.
But definitely they have to have consent. They are human beings, regardless if we agree or didn't agree with their ideology. What was very important to us from the very first second in making this, that we don't lie. We don't try to trick anyone into anything. And we make sure that they are aware of what they are getting into. They expected it to be propaganda, so the only difference is that we made a movie that is about propaganda, which takes away all of the power of what they were expecting. But everything that was filmed with consent, with consideration of the culture preaching, because you could go into a culture that you don't understand and you would do something that is very small, but for them is very huge. And this is the culture preaching is what would drive someone crazy. We had to be very careful not to do that. Not to, for example, film their woman or try to do anything around their woman, which directly would put them in a huge danger and would make them lose their mind, and it becomes way more dangerous. And it is, if someone, and I really got a golden rule before going there from people who have been in places like this. They said, with the big leader, get the permission before you start. Get the consent before you start shooting. With the smaller ones, get it at the end. Because the smaller ones has to be more aware, and by the time you spend more time with the smaller ones, you will know if the movie is gonna actually affect them personally or no. Yeah. Because if someone happens to someone because of the film, you are completely responsible for that. Mm-hmm. And the other big problem if we go to these dangerous places is that we could get this consent form and leave without really making anybody understand what we're after and how big what we're doing is. So to their mind, I'm being filmed for something really nice, and to their understanding, I'm gonna be on an AP report, or for in my case, I would just pass by Deutsche Welle or pass by Al Jazeera in a small report that will do nothing. But this is like a movie with impact campaign, with a huge pressure that keeps going for years. The film could live for 3-4 years, and the story is alive for 3-4 years, and the people has to be aware of what they are getting into. Yeah. And the idea of consent is not just about the first consent. We bear the responsibility to continue living that consent, because someone at the beginning might say, hey, I want to stay, I don't want to leave my country, which is the case of most of the people who are like fighting for their own country and home, and they are trying to make a change. But at a certain point, some people cannot do it anymore. And our films would participate in that, and we have to revisit every now and then this consent that we took, and this is our own responsibility that we need to revisit. It's no producer will tell us to revisit, no one will tell us to revisit, because the ones who lived with the people are the ones who know when it might be too dangerous. So we need to revisit these consents every now and then. Of course, in my case, I don't have connections with my guys, and I made sure that the movie is as neutral as possible and it doesn't break any of the culture aspects of their culture. But in other situations, we need to definitely reconsider revisiting this consent and make sure that we need to save this person, because they might actually die, and then...
Yes.
Yeah, and consent is really interesting, because even if they do sign, like you said, they don't really know what they're signing off on, right? I do courtesy screenings with all my participants before the public sees my films, because I want them to see themselves on the big screen, right? And it's always a shock to them to see themselves, because it's like years, maybe a year later, 2 years later, they said something 2 years ago that's no longer significant to their life right now, right? And yet there it is, right, on film forever. It's never going to change, and they get shocked, right? And so they don't really know what it means, that it's going to live on for many years, and it's always going to come back at them, you know. Like one woman I filmed, she was a teacher, a Filipino teacher recruited in the Philippines to teach in the US. She came to me and said, I'm no longer that person. I said, I think people understand that because it's the documentary, life continues after the last frame is shot. But she goes, but people won't understand. I'm no longer that vulnerable person fighting with, you know, her husband. She has since divorced, and she was now empowered, and I'm no longer that. So I made a deal with her. I said, okay, I'll make a deal with you. Come travel with me to film festivals, come up to the Q&A, and you get to say your piece. And she goes, I can do that? I said, yeah, and of course I had to raise money. I'm like, oh, okay, how do I do this? But I said, yes, you can. And so I think I gave her, it was important to give her back her voice of the present, because I fossilized her life on film, and life had moved on, you know. So it gave her back some kind of power. And every time the press would interview me about the film, I would always suggest to interview her, because then she could, you know, she could reclaim some of her narrative. We are taking the narratives of people real people, whose lives just evolve and move on, and they may be different by the time the film comes together. And we have to really be aware of what that consent is and how much they think they understand, but they really don't in the end, because it is something that will live on forever.
I'm curious to ask, how about Mrs. Marcos and her consent?
Well, okay, I also learned very early on in my career, consents don't matter, okay? No matter what you sign. She signed the consent and still sued us, right? Because of but she did. She signed a very long personal consent. I had to go to court. I had to fly into the Philippines to go to court, actually, and fight her in court. And in court, that was evidence that she had signed. But she had some excuse that she was under duress. Like Mrs. Marcos under duress never happens, right?
Yeah, their shoes.
Yeah. So I'm like, so I knew then that you can sign anything you want. If the person wants to sue you or take you to court, they will. And I think that the most important thing really is, at the end of the day, is trust and transparency with the people you film. And I was very transparent with Mrs. Marcos. But she did like the film in the beginning. She thought it represented her accurately, but then when the press started writing up the film, the reviews came out and they called her a pariah and delusional. She suddenly saw herself in the eyes of the critics and she didn't like it. And that's when she sued us. But in the beginning she did, because it was only her telling herself about the film, right? When other people told her about the film and didn't like it. So yeah, she changed her mind.
Not delusional at all, yeah.
Not delusional at all, exactly. She just proved their point, actually.
Yeah.
Carl?
Yeah, just on the issue of consent, I think Abraham makes a great point. You start off getting consent forms, but over a number of years of filming, things change all the time, and it's a constant conversation.
Yeah.
And then towards the end, before sort of locking the film, we got all the main protagonists to watch the film and watch it more than just once, and then come back to us in a week's time, in 2 weeks' time, tell us what you think. And there were some things that were taken out on their request. I sort of saying to them, I don't want to take stuff out because that's your preference. Tell me if there's something that's a problem for security, for your safety. And they were very happy with that. And then also halfway through, through filming, there was a certain person that we were following through the film, and they were happy for us to be following their story. And then we just realised it was getting too dangerous for that person, and we just pulled out.
Yeah. That was my deal too with Maria and her lawyers, because we, in exchange for full access to everything, all the legal meetings and stuff that we needed, we would show them the film before actually locking it, and we would talk about it only in terms of security, not story, right? So if there was a scene that
Would
endanger Maria, then we would talk about it. And based on that meeting, I think we excised like a 5-second scene. It was showing Maria going to her office the back way, right?
Yeah.
So obviously, it's like, we didn't think of that while cutting. It was like, oh, cool, she's going the back way. But of course, we didn't, and then the lawyers were like, you can't show that because then people will know the back way, right? I shouldn't have even said that, but who knows where the back way is, I'm not sure. But so based on that meeting, those few seconds were excised, and I think that was the only thing. We went back and forth, and that was the only thing excised, and that was purely because of security.
Yeah.
Well, what you just said, I'm doing right now, because when I talk about my colleagues who work in Belgrade on these cases, I have to be careful not to say what they do and where they go when the way they live their lives, because it might be too much information. And I'm like, I don't want to share it because this is like, there's cameras here.
Yeah, we couldn't put an exterior shot of Maria Ressa's home, for example.
Yeah.
We were very sure not to do that, right? Yeah. You have to think of these things, really.
All the time.
All the time.
I think we have to be starting to be conscious of the things that we say that might put our subjects and ourselves at risk as well.
Right.
Yeah, I think we can open the floor now for any questions. Yes.
Hi, thanks so much for this talk. I have a question for actually each one of you about what your personal red lines are. So you're talking about sometimes it's unclear how far it can go, but I always have this dilemma when I'm doing sensitive stories, and a couple of times I've just stopped because I've realized it's just not worth it in terms of being detained or going to prison or whatever it is. So I'm just wondering, like, how you assess that, especially in super unclear environments where it's very unclear what is too far.
What's your bottom line?
It's not your bottom line, it's the people around you. Your bottom line is always vague when you are in these spaces, because you assess based on what you want to happen rather than what's happening really inside in front of you. And you've been really, if you're attached to a story for like, let's say 1 year filming it, and it has become very dangerous, your heart tells you it's not, because you want to keep going. So it becomes the bottom line for the people around you, and this makes a huge difference when you have like people from the industry supporting you and being honest with them, of really telling them the situation, and of course talking to lawyers as well if the situation is involving other people. And the decision should not come from ourselves, because our decision in these situations is always affected by our emotions of wanting to continue and feeling sad that everything we've gone through could go to waste. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I think we're all lunatics in our families.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful of what they might need and feel and so on. I'm 42 and my mom still worries when I go anywhere. And it's like, she worries when I go to Berlin. What could possibly someone say if you go to Afghanistan?
Yeah, but I'm talking about people from industry, not your family. Your
right.
family are always extra sensitive. That's a totally different topic, which I think we're all failing at. I'm talking about people from industry, producers, distributors, or other filmmakers that could assess the situation with you, because in these situations, really, it's a lot of effort that has been put in something, and then having to give up on that thing because of the extra security is painful. So the decision must come from outside advices rather than internal voice, because internal voice try to find reasons to keep going.
Yeah.
My bottom line, oh gosh, I'm kind of fatalistic. It's cultural. So I just go. It's always, but it's not only me. Like I always say, it's my crew. So I always check in what is their, what is the line that they won't cross. And also, I know I can't make a decision in the heat of the moment, right? So you're right, Ibrahim. I call my producers. I'm like, this is happening, this is happening. What should I be doing? They said, take a breath, Just take a breath for a few days. But you can't take a breath for a few days because the story is ongoing. There's no way. But what is my, I guess it depends on my crew. Me, I can go on because I know I always think, will I regret it? Will I regret it? I think I will always regret not moving forward. And if the answer is yes, you'll regret it. I keep going. I just keep going. And maybe it's a little naive, right? But it's what you have to do. Who else is going to tell the story once you're already in it?
Carl?
I don't know, right? I don't know.
I add a little point. When you are on the ground, you have a huge sense of danger around you.
Yeah.
And you need to trust your instinct in that.
Yeah.
If it's on the ground. When it comes to others, security is not your decision on your own, but when it's your own security, the more you do it, the more you have this instinct of knowing where to stop or where to put the vest, or you know that you don't need to put the vest. There are extra measures that are happening which you should do, but you know it will hinder you, so you wouldn't put it. It becomes your own decision to assess, which was in my situation that I had to leave Afghanistan the same day I was shooting, because the Secret Service said to me, come tomorrow to our office with all of your footage. And I was like, this is the red line for me, because it's different now. So everybody in the situation of their own safety, it becomes your opinion. And some people around you will freak out from things that you think they are not rightful to freak out for, but they are sometimes right also.
Yeah, I never stay with my family in the Philippines when I'm filming, because I think they'll drive me nuts with their worry. So I know I can't, right? And I also know I can't put them in that kind of situation.
Yeah.
And their worry will make me worry more, I think. But right after shooting, and so it begins, Marcos was in power suddenly, right? Suddenly. Marcos was in power again, and someone said, get out of the country with all your drives. So, and just also test the waters, right? Can you still leave the country? So right after we wrapped, I left with all the drives, right? And then I left clones of it back in the Philippines, just in case I'm stopped at the airport. We still have dupes or triplicates back somewhere in Manila. Yeah, but then again, how real is it? And then it becomes more real in your head. You know, your mind plays games with you. You know, when you're in that situation. So it's good to like really take a breath, but I never do. So, but you know, it's good advice. It's good advice.
May I ask a second question? Oh, sorry.
Okay, you can ask.
Other than that's a really hard question to answer. There's no clear line, you know, just thinking about that, you know, I don't know, I've been very selfish and, you know, on those types of things with my family, you know, over the years. And so, you know, on a personal level, probably, you know, cross lines that I shouldn't have in terms of now, so the impact on family, and that's something. But, you know, in general, you know, it's just this constant dialogue of safety and security for yourself and the people that you're reporting on. You know, I've got a day job working for AFP, the French news agency, and, you know, we're in bureaus all, you know, in all around the world. And the decisions that our journalists make, you know, they're so complex and varied every single day. You know, we had a journalist in Kabul at when the Taliban took over, and you know, my job at the time was sort of managing the editorial operations from Hong Kong, and he's a war correspondent. He's been around, you know, all around the world. And I remember having this conversation that you know, he was in our office, and the Taliban were on the outskirts of Kabul, and this boy's tough. He was just so tough, and it's like, you know, Fox, you know, are you okay? And I'm good. Really? You're good? I went to bed sort of dreaming about Fox and woke up in the first, yeah, I'm good. And then we ended up, you know, getting dozens of our Afghan correspondents and their family members out of Afghanistan at the time, and Fox stayed there the whole time. And
after the Taliban took over.
Yeah, and he.
How are you talking about?
David Fox, his name is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, what tough. So his red line is completely different to my red line, but it was, you know, his decision.
Yeah, I also just remembered that Maria would say, Maria Ressa would say, you know, keep shooting around me because it keeps me safe, because the cameras are rolling, right? So when your participant who's in the crosshairs of a crazy government like Duterte says, be around, you're keeping me safer, you're like, okay, so I guess we're around, right? So there's that, right? I never thought of it that way, but she did say, I think, you know, it keeps me safer when you're there. She goes, come move into the apartment, right? She wanted us to move into the apartment because who knows, whatever. But that was interesting. So that was a twist, that we were keeping her safe because the cameras were rolling.
Yeah, there's a follow-up question.
Yeah, so the second question is about reporting or filming about companies or multinationals who then could threaten to sue you for like reporting something. I'm just wondering how you handle that, because I have a particular dilemma right now in a story that I'm working on, and I'm just wondering, is it better just to not mention the name, or do you have some advice in terms of how to deal with that kind of thing? Because obviously no one wants to get sued as a journalist, so I'm just curious about if any of you have had that situation, or...
I'm sorry, is it a film or a...
No, I'm a journalist, so I'm doing a...
So you do it for a company?
Story. So
for a company, you're working for a company?
For a media organization, yeah.
Because the media organization is responsible for that. It's not the responsibility of the journalist, no?
I think so, yeah.
And in film, you have the E&O, which is like a type of insurance you need to have when you're working in such a hostile environment, and you tell the insurance these are the situations. So if someone sues you, you get the insurance to cover all of the what you're going through, and also the lawyers are doing that. But for companies, it's the responsibility for the companies. It's never the responsibility for the journalist to be responsible for anything against that. And each company has its own values. When I worked in Al Jazeera, they had standards that were a bit lower than the standards when I saw in Deutsche Welle. Deutsche Welle would make everything much harder for us when I was working for them. I don't know how things are for you in AFP, but every company has its own regulations in that, I guess.
Yeah, so for independent filmmakers, we have errors and omission insurance. So we have E&O that protects us. So if we're sued, we're covered by insurance. I mean, I don't think you can self-censor because at the risk that they'll come after you, right? That might be difficult to do.
Yeah, well, you have like slap lawsuits that are a strategy for a bunch of, companies, governments, and so on. They just want to smother you with lawsuits, which is what happens to us. Yeah, the company is responsible, our lawyers are taking care of it, but every other day you have to go to the court. Spend the whole day there instead of doing your job, and that's their agenda.
Yeah, I mean, that happened to Maria, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was lawsuit after lawsuit. She'd have to go, and that is the point. She couldn't do her job because she had to fight stuff in court.
Yeah. Any more questions? Yes.
It was already briefly mentioned, but I was interested also in, I mean, you go a long way to shoot your footage and then you have it somewhere stored and it's the most, thing to keep safe. And you already mentioned, having doubles, having different ways, or also having to get out of a country which is a repressive regime. I don't know if this space is safe enough, but I was curious if you can share maybe ways in which you transfer footage or ways in which you store footage that is sensitive in that sense and that has your safety or the one of your team.
So every night, I have a dedicated person. So every night we just dump. It's a triplicate actually. So 3, so 2 clones and a master, and just to make sure we have it. And then those 2 clones go separate ways in different locations.
Physically.
And we don't keep it in the production in the hotel because the first place they look for it is in the hotel. So every night we know we have to dupe it. Right, that protects the footage.
But it's also nowadays it's really hard to in areas like hostile areas. It's very hard to upload because the internet is very weak.
Yeah.
Like a 1-minute file now is like 500 gigabytes. So like to upload just a 1-minute file becomes a hassle. So it all becomes very physical.
Or they stop the Wi-Fi where you are, so you can't do it. So
I had them recording my feet with the important footage.
That's clever.
One of the things actually when the Marcos Jr. came into power was we were scrambling to transfer files to abroad just so that we would keep archives safe. And one of the things that we considered actually was the digital policies and rights abroad. So I think Europe has one of the more progressive. So the digital security experts would recommend to store it here in Europe because of your protection policies.
Germany is one of the highest.
Yes.
Yeah, but also, for example, your phone, right? All your contacts, everything that you have on you, like it's easily taken away. Is there like workshops or are you briefed in a way before you go into a place which is a hostile environment to keep sure that your networks are also safe because we're living in a very digital area where your phone is easily taken away and your whole WhatsApp groups is suddenly with the police, for example.
That's what dummy phone is for.
What?
That's what dummy phone is for.
Dummy phone.
Or and I'm in 2 minds about this. They always say don't do face recognition, because they take your phone or arrest you, and then they can always do recognition but so I never follow it because it's just something. It sounds good, but they'll always get the information anyway they want, right? They have your phone, there are ways to, but that's one thing they say, don't do the thumb or don't do the fingerprint or face recognition. Sounds good.
Just to respond, there are actually digital security trainings, especially in environments like us where there's really under authoritarianism. But I think the rule of thumb really is just put into the digital secure spaces what you think would be dangerous, but not everything, because it's really hard. It's a behavior thing to really shift to more secure systems or practices. So we try to be a balance of both. So put what's out there in the normal platforms, what you normally do, because it would be more actually, those in power would be more curious if you hide everything, just like how Ramona does it.
I'm really a prime target. They're going to come for me.
Also, Doc Society has its own. They have online this like different booklets, and one of them is about digital security, and it has a lot of details of how can you do the digital security. And I think you can, if it's a hostile environment, then you just contact them and say, I would love to have the course, and they could do it to you personally, which what they did to me really early on, that they gave me this digital security.
Yeah, one of the advices of one of my colleagues, at least in journalism, which is a harder thing to do when you're filming a documentary, but in journalism is to go full anti-digital, to go way back to this. This is like sometimes the best way to like meet someone, talk to him, take notes, physical notes, keep them to yourself if it's super sensitive, because whatever device you have, it can be hacked.
Yeah.
There are softwares and hardwares and all kinds of stuff. When Anna's apartment was invaded, she told me they extracted all the information from the laptop wirelessly through a device. They didn't even plug it into anything. They just hovered the device above the laptop and extracted all the information from it into the device. And it was like, what is this?
Fun.
Any more questions before we wrap up? Just so probably to wrap up, I know facing repression in the work that you do takes a lot of toll, as you clearly pointed out. But what makes you sane? What keeps your sanity?
That's assuming we're sane.
Yes.
I think
A semblance of sanity.
It's the fight for me. I tell to tell my kids that Xi Jinping is thinks he's the most powerful person in the world, but he's really scared of what journalists write.
What Daddy does.
What journalists say, and so it must mean something. So if the journalists are out there, writing those words, and they're being jailed for it, they're being killed for it, it has real importance. So we just got to keep up the fight.
I think it has something to do with going after your calling. If what you're doing is you're responding to your own calling, then you get this very specific kind of energy which you wouldn't have if you go after something that is not yours. If you really are trying to go after a specific topic that means a lot to you, so you know every day you're going to sleep, you've done something without waiting for the results, because waiting for the results is just exhausting and it gets nowhere. And when it comes, it's never matching what you were hoping for. So if it's all about doing what you're supposed to do because you know this is what you meant to do, and it makes you relaxed to go to sleep well, then you're capable of doing it again and again and again next day.
Ilan, before Ramona.
Well, I don't know. It's a tough question, but I guess that I'm trying to develop this ability to separate my work from the rest of my life, which is really hard. But when I do it, it's usually I like to take really long walks in Belgrade and listen to a lot of music, to podcasts, to whatever, which is the only chance I get during the day to actually, invest into myself, something like that. And when I do it, when I go to work, for example, and from work to home, walking, it's a good day. It's like I did something good.
I find myself like, I hold my breath for the entire production time, right? I find myself not breathing. And then when it's done, I exhale. And I really just take off for a month and not think of the film. And I think you need that pause. I think that's what keeps me sane. And, the breathing out. And I always say it's like, for those of us who've given birth, it's like birthing. You forget how hard it is. You really forget, so you do it again, right? and then when you're doing, why am I doing this? And then the film comes out, and it has, impact in the world, and it touches people, and you're like, that's why I'm doing it. Okay, let's do it again. But there is a kind of forgetting how difficult it is. in order to do it again.
Luckily, yeah.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim, Carl, Milan, and Ramona. Thank you, everyone.